I'm thrilled that this has been a really, really cool day. I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning to catch a flight to get here. So if halfway through I just give up, sit down, and we chat from there, I apologize. But as we get rolling, I'm going to get more excited. I love doing this. And for all of you who are up close, apparently I can become a bit much as I get rolling. So at any point, feel free to just slowly roll back. That's how it goes. What's that? You know Tim Hortons? Tim Hortons is so weird. It's like our coffee shop, and it's terrible. Like, it's terrible coffee. It's drinking dirty, muddy water. But like, it's so Canadian. You go to the airport, there's 65 people in line for Tim Hortons, and there's a coffee shop directly across the way. Nobody. But it's just like, it's like a patriotic thing. We're like, no, that's an American coffee shop, and I will have none of that. So I 10 years at U of T, and you could take a guy out of the classroom, but you could never let us get tired of posing questions to people who don't want to answer them. So I'll be doing tons of that today. And I'll start with this one. How many of you, by show of hands, must be seats, I'm not going to make you stand. Go ahead.
There's seats back here.
Because I know you want to be super polite and don't walk while I'm talking, but because I just said I'm Canadian, there's no way I can be like, there are people standing. This is unacceptable. I'm going to go get a chair. So I want to start with a question. How many of you, by show of hands, are completely and totally comfortable with calling yourself a leader? Oh, I'm just letting it hang there. Thank you very much. Because now, considering what all of you do in this room, there's a problem there. Like, there really is. If there's any group of people on the planet who have every right to raise their hands there, it is all of you. But what just happens always happens. I've asked it to over 1,000 audiences around the world, different industries, different backgrounds, different ages. Less than 1% of the time do I get half the people in any given room willing to raise their hands and call themselves leaders. Like 1 out of 100 times does it happen. It hasn't happened once in the last 2 years. And most of the time that it has been children under the age of 12. There's something about kids. There's something about the term leader that the older we get, the more we treat it as something we need permission to use. So if you get enough letters after your name, or you work at a prestigious enough company, or you make enough money, what happens is some external individual or organization bestows upon you whatever it is you think you need to raise your hands in front of other people. Whether it's letters after your name, whatever the case may be. But until we get that external permission, we're hesitant to do it in front of other people. As soon as we get it, we want other people to know about it. As soon as we do get it, the letters or the promotion, it shows up on our LinkedIn profile and our email signature. The day it happens, it's in our email signature. But until we get the external permission, I think most of us think that using the term, especially in front of people you respect, the worry is it calls for a level of cockiness and arrogance you don't want to be associated with. So we tap it down. What you just saw in this room, and what I see all over the world, is this society-wide tendency to turn leadership into something bigger than us, to make it beyond us, to make it about money and titles and influence, and to make it about changing the world. And where that comes from is how you got taught about it. So I came from the education world. And what happens when you want to teach people a new concept, what you do is you give them examples of the concept, particularly young people. If you want to introduce an idea to someone, you give them examples of what it is. So think about how the term leader was taught to you way back when. Think about the examples you were given to illustrate the point. My guess is that the vast majority of them were giants. You were taught about presidents, and you were taught about scientific groundbreakers, and you were taught about people who conquered empires. The vast majority of the people about whom you were taught, they were white men. And we're still doing that to kids today. Like, we can claim otherwise, but look who gets the movies made out about them right now. Look at Warren Buffett invest, look at Steve Jobs innovate, look at Mark Zuckerberg create a global empire. And I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating successful people. The challenge is when we use giants as our examples, particularly for young people, whatever examples you're given when you're a kid to introduce a concept, that formulates how you think of it for the rest of your life. That's the foundation upon which every subsequent concept is built. There's nothing wrong with celebrating giants. The problem is we don't see ourselves in them. And as a result, what happens is a chasm forms between who you think you are and and what you think a leader is. And that gap exists for everybody, but for some groups in our society, the gap is much bigger, and until we recognize that, I don't think we can start to address it. It exists for everybody. But as is the case with everything, it hits different groups in different ways. If you want to know how society views any concept, do a Google image search of the concept. That will tell you what society thinks about something. So 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I went home and did a Google image search of the term leader, just to see what we as a society put up in response. What I found was I found a chicken, a penguin, 2 different types of fish. All of these things were portrayed as a leader before the first image of a woman appeared. This was the first woman that appeared. This is our Google gender groundbreaker. She doesn't even have a face. 46th image, by the way. Kermit the Frog appeared as a leader before a woman did. Now, do a Google image search of the term CEO. You will get approximately 6 pages of this. A wildly diverse group of people. 2 years ago, anyone want to guess who the first woman that appeared when you did a Google image search of the term CEO was?
Sandberg.
Sandberg. Good guess. It was not. Nope. Wasn't Oprah either. This was the first woman that appeared. However, that's the appropriate response. Horror. And this is what gives me a lot of hope. The younger the audience to whom I show that, the less laughter there is, the more anger there is. And I think that's important. Now, there's a million reasons why this is a problem, and this is indicative of 1,000 systemic barriers that I don't have to teach anybody in this room. And look, a straight white guy is not the guy who should be giving this speech anyway. However, ultimately, Barbie is still a giant. We're using a giant again. I discovered today she has a last name. I don't know if you saw that, but the internet went nuts. Barbie has a last name. Anyway, Barbie is a giant. And the problem with using these giants is it causes all of us to devalue the leadership that we do demonstrate every day. And we start to let moments of leadership at home and at work, in our relationships, moments of leadership pass by us and we don't celebrate them. And when I say moments of leadership, what I'm talking about are moments of generosity, compassion, recognition, kindness, empowerment. Those are moments of leadership, but we do not call them that. We call them little things. Little things. And the problem with calling moments of empowerment and kindness, generosity, little, is it reinforces the idea that in order for something to be leadership, in order for something to be big, it has to make us rich or it has to make us famous. And what we do is we start to let all these moments of real leadership pass by without being recognized as leadership, which means we don't celebrate them and we don't feel good about them. For better or for worse, the stuff that makes you feel good when you do it is the stuff that you are driven to do again and again and again. If it feels good, you do it more often. So when we let moments of true leadership pass by and we don't celebrate them as such, and when you let moments of leadership pass by your colleagues and the people that you serve and the people that you love, and you don't call it leadership, you diminish it, what we're effectively doing is we're pulling leadership out of our organizations, out of our communities, out of our lives, and off this planet. Like, I've studied leadership my entire adult life. There is no shortage of leadership on this planet. The United States Congress notwithstanding. But there is no shortage of leadership on this planet. However, we are systematically ignoring a huge percentage of the leadership that surrounds us every day. We have created a world where the vast majority of the leadership on the planet is going by unrecognized and uncelebrated, and most of the leadership on this planet and in this organization is coming from people who don't see themselves as leaders. That's a problem. Because when people feel they have the right to call themselves leaders, they make better decisions, they make them faster, and they are way more creative when they make them. So we have defined leadership far too narrowly, and I think that we can start to broaden it. That's what I want to talk about today. Not just the importance of doing so, but a strategy and an actual set of steps to do so. I'm going to start with this, my friend. Are you ready? Here goes. What is your personal leadership philosophy?
You should lead with the expectation that what you do should reflect others as well. So almost like the golden rule that in an office setting. Like, do as you imagine is correct and lead by example.
Cool. In an office setting. Interesting. Why'd you say that?
Because we're speaking of guests in the context of office. Our actions in this office have effects outside of the office, but they start with it.
True. The golden rule, I find the golden rule, I told a mentor of mine that that's what drove me, the golden rule. And he said, yeah, we need to revise that. And I said, you know who wrote it, right? And he said, yeah, but the platinum rule is far better than the golden rule. And I said, okay, what's the platinum rule? He said, the golden rule says treat other people like you'd like to be treated. Which is a cool way of going through life. He says the platinum rule says treat other people like they would like to be treated. And I blew my mind. Because he said, if you think about it, the golden rule is an incredibly self-absorbed way to go through life. He said to treat other people like they would like to be treated involves an extra step. You have to ask, how would he like to be treated? Which means you can't live it without embodying empathy in your life. It's impossible. So it's an interesting, I always like sharing that, not to say don't live by the golden rule or that you're wrong for doing it. It's just he revised it for me in a way that I thought expanded my understanding of it. When prior to this moment, have you ever articulated that personal leadership philosophy, which is really good, by the way? When was the last time you did it out loud?
Probably the last job interview I had.
The last job interview. You are never more self-aware than in a job interview. I like that. Okay. If you want, you can haul out your phone at some point during today's presentation and text someone who you know well, that if possible you work with closely, and you ask them, what is my personal leadership philosophy? Because you will learn an awful lot about what you actually put out into the world by that question. I also do that, so if anyone hauls out their phone at any point during the speech, I just assume that's what you're doing. I'm like, I haven't bored them. Okay, let's, hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Oh, you did it. You did it. I knew you were like, if I stay frozen, the woman behind me is going to take this bullet. All right? You see how she's like, some people actually do this. All right, you know what? I'll come back to you for a harder question. You could have had the one you already knew. Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Wonderful. What's your personal leadership philosophy?
Do what you can and do it well.
Do what you, God, that's good. I'm stealing all this. Okay, how often do you say that out loud?
Every day.
Every
I have
day.
kids, I tell them the same.
You have kids.
Tell them the
Amazing.
same.
Here's why I asked the question about the personal leadership philosophy. A personal leadership philosophy is something that you articulate consistently so that people know how you evaluate decisions, how you evaluate your own decisions, and how you evaluate other people's. So if you want to know, people know what to expect. When they do something, they know that this is how you do it. That's what you're looking for. Did that person do what they could, and did they do it well? And people know that that's how you're going to evaluate what you do and what they do. That brings a level of understanding and predictability and consistency to who you are. And what I discovered is that there's research about how important having one of these is. And a lot of people don't bother because they don't think they're leaders. So why bother creating a philosophy? What the research shows is individuals who got a personal leadership philosophy, who articulate it. What that means is you can rhyme it off in 30 seconds or less, like that. If you do, it's not the first time you've done so in the last 72 hours. And if I asked someone who worked really closely with you, what is her personal leadership philosophy? They would rhyme it off. And they probably roll their eyes when they do it. That's how you know that you've got a when someone's like, oh, it's this. Because they've heard it so many times. But here's why it's important. People who have one of those, for those three things are true, one, they score 110% higher on ratings of overall leadership effectiveness than people who don't. 110%. The people who are on their teams rate them 140% more effective than people who are led by individuals who don't have one of those philosophies. Their teams have higher levels of spirit, pride, commitment to the organization, and a willingness to work hard. And you are 135% more likely to be trusted if you are seen as someone with a personal leadership philosophy. The reason I think it's so important to come up with one is that I discovered that this phrase gets thrown around a lot. The phrase, I'm the type of person who, is almost always followed by a lie. It really is. The question is, I don't know the secret to happiness, but I do know that one of the keys to unhappiness is when a gap forms between who you want to be and how you're actually behaving, and you become aware of that gap. That's it. And that gap exists for all of us. But we deny it exists, or we rationalize it. All right, it's temporary. The gap is temporary because I need to make a little bit more money, or I have to pay off a few more debts, or I have to get through this really difficult time. Leadership begins when we acknowledge there's a gap between who we want to be and how we're actually behaving, where we recognize that gap is our responsibility, and we say we're going to do something to fix it. When I wanted to know my personal leadership philosophy and how I wanted to come up with a way to close that gap, I asked 10 of my students, what's my personal leadership philosophy? And I discovered that it's this. And I never really knew this, but they told me, whenever we come to you with a problem, before we leave your office, you always say the same annoying thing. When you don't know what to do in a situation, ask yourself, what would the person who I want to be do in this situation? Then do that. This is an amazing way to make decisions, and it's incredibly hard to do. Because what I found in 15 years of doing this is most people haven't given a tremendous amount of thought to who it is they want to be. Because we all went through an education system that taught you you should pay closest attention to the things on which you're going to be tested. And very rarely will the tests that you've been given in your life ask you, what are your core values? Who you want to be. It asked, what do you want to do in your life? Very rarely said, who do you want to be? It never asked us and tested us on what are the criteria you're going to use to make the biggest decisions in your life. We never got tested on that, so we became our own worst subjects. And we haven't actually given a ton of thought to who we want to be, and therefore we can't plan daily a plan to actually give ourselves evidence that we're being that person. We hope to do it. I was one of these people, but I got straight A's, so I was convinced I knew myself. Because externally, I've been evaluated as being smart. And this is a bigger problem for high-achieving people. For a lot of you in this room, at a very young age, people figured out that you got shit done. They figured it out really young. So what happens when people figure that out about you is they keep asking you to do it. And then you get rewarded for doing it. And so, a lot of the time, our identity gets wrapped up in being able to do that. And all of a sudden, years go by, and we never stopped and actually said, who do I want to be? We just discovered something that got us rewards and made other people happy with us. But we never actually asked, how happy does it make me? I was one of these people. And I was 28 years old the first time I ever gave a lecture at the University of Toronto. And I was lecturing on leadership theory. And theory is the word you add to interesting things to make them boring. So halfway through the lecture, I can't do this anymore. I go off textbook and I start talking about some of the things I'm going to talk about today. At the end of the class, a young woman comes up to me and says, what every educator on the planet wants to hear at the end of your first ever class. She says, I don't get it. I said, it is a broad concept. Could you be more specific? And she said, I don't understand leadership anymore. And I said, that's okay. We have all semester to figure out what leadership means to you. It's why we're doing this course. And she said, no, I understood leadership before I came to your class. No, I don't understand leadership. Which is the whole point of my life now. Like, I hope people walk out of rooms that I've had a chance to speak to them and are thinking I'm not really sure what leadership means anymore, but I want to think about it. This was my first day, however. So I felt I had let this girl down. And it's not cheap to go to school there. So I said, okay, what confuses you the most? And we will start there. And she said, I'm an international student. I'm here on exchange. I did not grow up here. Where I grew up, we were taught the smartest people are supposed to be the leaders. The smartest people are the ones who get the best grades in school. So if you get good grades in school, it's your way of showing the world that you one day deserve to be a leader. And if you don't, it's your way of showing the world that you never deserve that responsibility. But after listening to you, I think leadership means something different in Canadian. And we can talk about whether Canadian's own language later, eh? But she said, could you explain what leadership means to you in the simplest English terms possible, please? And I do not know if you've ever been asked a question to which you are certain you have an answer until someone asks you the question. Because I open my mouth to give what I think both she and I assume would be a brilliant answer. Nothing. I have nothing. And your brain starts panicking. It actually starts talking to itself. You're like, you know the answer to this. Just give her a damn answer. Nothing. So I did what professors have been doing for years when a student stumps you. Well, what do you think? She's the only student who ever looked back at me and said, I don't know, that's why I asked you. And I said, okay. Well, why don't you go home and think about it? Reflect on it, and we'll open next class with a discussion. And she actually says, thank you, sir. No problem. Because now I get to go home and figure out the answer. And I joke about it now. I was really upset by that. Like that night, I was really, really angry with myself because leadership was a value I wanted to embody every day of my life. I wanted to stand for it in everything I did personally and professionally. And this young woman had asked me the most basic question. Well, what does it mean in the simplest English terms possible? And I choked on it. And so I went home that night and I posed myself a hypothetical. And it's one I'm going to pose to all of you. But my friend, I would like you to answer in front of the entire room, if you don't mind, okay? It's because you have great hair. And that's just what happens, okay? Are you ready? Okay. If you said no, I'm still doing it. So, okay, I'd like all of you to consider this, though. And if you want to write down your answer, that's fine as well. I want you to imagine that I have someone follow you around for 30 days out of your life without your knowledge. And they see every interaction of which you are a part. Public, private, online, and virtual. Someone always giggles at that. They see how you interact with people you love and people you cannot stand and people you've never met before in a grocery store or at a restaurant, okay? At the end of those 30 days, if I sat that person down and said, you will follow, is it Johannes? Johannes. You follow Johannes around for a month out of his life, you have no idea. Going just on how you saw him behave. What are the 3 values that he aims to stand for above all others? What 3 values does he want to put out into the world in his wake, personally and professionally? What 3 values does, if he has kids, does he want to pass on to them first and foremost? If you've been the man or if you've been the woman that you want to be for those 30 days, what 3 values do you hope that person says they saw out of you? Integrity.
Probably cleverness.
Clever. That's a first. That's awesome. Integrity. Clever. Cunning, maybe. Although cunning is like a negative connotation to it, doesn't it? Right? And kindness. Okay. Integrity, cleverness, and kindness. Okay. Integrity. By far and away the number one that people give me. So I want you to imagine that young woman from my class walks up to you and says, I'm so sorry, English is not my first language, but she's clearly brilliant. Could you explain what integrity means in the simplest English terms possible, please?
Not for me either.
Yeah.
Otherwise I would have given it straight up.
Okay. Sure we would. Explain integrity.
The ability to stand by your values when faced with any challenge.
Amazing. Now, you just came up with that now, right? Out loud for the first time in a while, right?
Yeah, ever.
Yeah, ever. Okay. But it's the number one value you want to stand for above all others.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when faced with challenges.
But it's weird, eh? It's the number one value you want to stand for, and no one's, like, we never actually articulated it. Hi, how are you? There's no one behind you. You are What was the number one that popped into your head? You don't have to give me all 3, just one. Kindness, okay. A 5-year-old walks up to you. Freely, how many of you have raised a 5-year-old at some point in your life? For about a year, give or take. Okay. 5-year-olds are the greatest professors of all time. Because 5-year-olds not only ask incredibly good questions, they are relentless in asking them. You cannot BS a 5-year-old. They will ask follow-ups until they get the damn answer, and they will point out inconsistencies in your answers. Imagine how different this world would be if every politician had to answer to a press room full of 5-year-olds. Yes, that's not what you said yesterday. Well, we've changed it. But yesterday you said this. That's not fair. All right, because they have an incredibly defined sense of fairness, don't they? I once had a 5-year-old ask me if I was the Pope. I don't care how many Q&As you've done, you're like, you're not ready for that question. But in his class, they were talking about the Pope. And then a stranger walked in. And when you're 5, and you're talking about a stranger, and a stranger walks in, oh, it's the dude. That's how life works when you're 5. And he looks at me and says, are you the Pope? And it took me a minute, but I kind of got myself together, and I said, no, I'm here to give a speech to your teachers. And he looks at me and says, oh, what's a speech? 1,000 of these. I've given 1,000. I have never been directly asked that question. And I do it, it's a huge part of my life. I've never been asked that question. Marshall McLuhan said that we don't know who first discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't a fish. We are least aware of the things that surround us most closely. And a lot of the things in our lives we have never questioned. But there are times when your brain is better than you think it is. And in response to that question, I looked down at this young man. I have no idea where this came from. And I said, a speech is an opportunity to change minds. That's the noise my brain made. I actually, like that little self-content, like every one of you has done it. At some point you've been like, nice. And he looks back at me and he says, oh, how do you know that you should? Shut up. And also, we need to get you out of school before we wreck you. Because that's the type of leadership. Like we start blinking over the water that surrounds us. David Foster Wallace did an extraordinary speech called This is Water, that talks about our unconsciousness of what surrounds us. I just gave you like 2 minutes to think of. If that 5-year-old walked up to you and said, explain what kindness means, and could you start your definition with 3 words, a commitment to, what would you say? Yeah, a commitment to being nice to people. No, but again, we're making up these definitions as we're being asked, right? And yet these are the things that we want to define us. I went home that night and I gave myself the same height, but there must be chairs for these good people.
There are. There's 2.
Okay, go, by all means, please. I don't want to make you stand, especially looking at my back. So I went home that night and I gave myself the same hypothetical because there's no question I'm going to ask any of you that at some point didn't stump me. I promise you that. But I went home and I thought, a room full of people I highly respect are talking about me and I'm not in the room. What words do I hope they use to describe me? And I didn't come up with 3, I must have come up with 40. This is a portion of that list. Empowerment and respect and integrity and friendship and courage. But what happened is every time I wrote one down, and I encourage you to do this exercise, every time I wrote one down, what I did is I imagined a young woman from my class walking up to me and saying, English is not my first language, I've never heard the word respect before. Could you explain what it means in the simplest English terms possible? And like most of you in this room, you give me 5 to 10 minutes with any one of those words, and I can give you a remarkable definition for them. But I was 28 years old that night, and it was the first time that I had ever bothered to define what most of them meant. And I had spent the better part of 15 years of my life evaluating how I felt about myself as an educator, as a professional, as a friend, and as a human being based on how well I lived up to those values. And I judged other people swiftly, and I judged them harshly if I thought that they didn't live up to one of these values. And yet, I had no idea what they actually meant. Whether we're aware of it or not, most of the decisions and the judgments you make about yourself and other people happen by you having a list of values in your head, comparing your behavior and theirs to those values and deciding live up or not. That's how we make judgments about ourselves and others, and we're unconscious about the criteria we're using for them. That's why I tell leaders of all ages and all backgrounds and all industries, you have to take the time to define the things you want to define you. Because if you don't, you always somehow feel like you're not quite living up to something. Like let's say you want to embody integrity every day of your life, all right? You want to stand for it in everything you do personally and professionally. If you don't clearly define what it means, if you don't turn it into a finish line so you know when you cross it, if you don't say, here are the specific behaviors that make that up, you could be, and you probably are, embodying integrity every single day of your life. The problem is you are rarely giving yourself permission to celebrate that fact. Most of the moments where you are being the man or being the woman that you want to be in this world are passing by unrecognized and uncelebrated in the course of your to-do list. And it's the celebrations in our lives and our organizations that give us momentum, that give us strength, that give us pride. And I believe that setting goals is basically planning celebrations. And we set goals for our organizations, And we set goals for our careers, and we set goals for our financial lives. My argument is a personal culture of leadership comes from spending just as much time and just as many resources setting and chasing goals for your daily character as you do for your organization, as you do for your career and for your financial lives. Daily behaviors, goals for daily behaviors. Because what I found is that people who don't define the things they want to define them, no matter how much money they've made, how successful they appear to be, they struggle to answer a question when I pose it to them. And now, we're coming back to you. Are you ready? It is the most difficult question in the entire presentation. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
Why do you matter? I'm loved and I love. I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you. Hi. Why do you matter? Because you exist. What are you doing with that?
What am I doing with that? My existence.
Yeah.
Try to make sense of it.
Okay. I like that. That's a good answer. I'm trying. All right? Hi, how are you? Don't, yeah. Oh, there it is. Like left to the right. No. Why do you matter?
Because I want to add value to my existence.
Okay, because you want to.
Yeah.
Because you can. Because you're trying. All right? How many of you have kids? Okay. Go home tonight and ask them that question. If your kids are under the age of 5, they are going to give you amazing answers to that question. I've had people send me video of it, and they're awesome. Two of my favorites. One, the young guy just looks at his mom's camera and goes, "Because I'm a hug monster." And the camera just goes black. Like it's, but something funny happens when our kids turn about 4 or 5. We send them to school, and they stop believing that why they matter is up to them to determine. And it's supposed to be evaluated externally. And for the next 20 years of our lives, that incredibly formative time, we all spent 20 years of our lives in that system. And it's often a lesson we never unlearn, that why we matter isn't up to us to determine. Who are we to be asked that? First time I ever asked the question was to a remarkable student. He wasn't sure what was next for him, because when you're in elementary school, you know you're going to high school, right? When you're in high school, we teach kids that you have to go to college, you have to go to university, at least in North America, right? And then at the end of this, as undergrad though, he had no idea what to do next. First time in his life it wasn't clear, and he was freaking out. But he's really talented. And so it was the first time I ever asked another human being that question. I said, well, let's start here, Kyle. Why do you matter? I didn't know what it did to people at the time. And he blinks twice. And he says, well, I don't yet. That's why I'm working so hard. Which is an unacceptable answer to get from anyone that you care about. But I started asking other students. And then I started asking people who worked in not-for-profits and people who worked as senior executives and CEOs. And I started to realize there's a really troubling number of people who are not aware they are living their lives on the premise that I don't matter yet, that's why I'm working so hard. And I spent 15 years in higher education. And I started to question, how can we claim that what we're delivering is an education when some of the most dynamic, driven, compassionate, creative, well-educated people on the planet can't answer, why do you matter? Because no one's ever asked you before. And that we don't ask ourselves that question. You know why I think it's so hard, I've discovered? Is because we hope to matter, and we hope to lead, and we hope to make a difference. And hope is a wildly powerful force. And we should foster hope in our lives and the lives of everyone that we touch. Hope, however, is a terrible strategy. And if you want to matter, and you want to lead, and you want to make a difference, we have to plan to matter, plan to lead, and plan to make a difference. And I think we do a lot of time hoping, and on a very personal level, we don't do a ton of time planning for it. We hope to live and to figure it out, and to have an impact on the people around us, and to love and be loved. We hope, but I don't think we're necessarily planning to do it. Or we plan to do it when we have time. In the meantime, we have email inboxes to empty, right? How do you plan to matter? I think there's 3 key steps. 1, pick a value Identify your values. Define what they actually are to you. What are they? And then define what they mean with the phrase "a commitment to." When you do that, you identify and define your values. It's not just some nice reflective question, not reflective exercise. What you're doing when you do that is you're giving yourself a personal and professional tool. What you're giving yourself is a set of criteria for decision making. And once you clearly put some thought into what are the values that drive me and what do they actually mean, decision making is a simple process, though not an easy one. Because once you do that, every time you need to make decisions, the process is consistent. You look at the options available to you, you hold them up next to the list of values, and you say, which one of these options is most consistent with that list of values? The challenge is, and this is where leadership falls apart, often the option that is most consistent with your list of values sucks. It is not the one that makes you look good. It is not the one that allows you to avoid consequences. It is not the one that allows you to take the money, keep the job, or remain in the relationship. But it's almost always the decision that you're happiest you made 5 years from now. If we make every decision in our lives as if we're standing in front of a room full of people we respect, as opposed, right, 5 years from now explaining the decision, as opposed to we're about to make it, a lot of the noise surrounding our decision making falls away. You know how you wish you could stand up in 5 years and say what you did right now. That's how we make decisions. It's very difficult to. My question is, if you haven't identified your values clearly and defined what they mean, ask yourself this. What criteria have I been using to make decisions my whole life? Has it been consistent? It has in many ways, because often the criteria we've been using to make decisions our whole lives, and I'm one of these people too, is this. Which option will avoid the most consequences right now? And that is not leadership decision making. And if we use that criteria to make decisions, the way that we should end that sentence, I'm the type of person who makes decisions like a coward. And it's hard to do it. But that's how we plan to map it. Identify our values, define what they mean, and then use them as criteria for decision making. Good leaders do that because it allows them to live their values every time the opportunity presents itself. Where good leaders separate from great leaders separate from good leaders live their values whenever they get a chance. Great leaders create opportunities to live their values. They don't let days go by if they can't point to a specific act that they did that actually reinforces them being the person they claim to be. Because most of us can say, I'm the type of person who, and then 9 out of 10 can't point to one single thing they did that day that proves that. And then we do that day after day after day. So how do we actually create opportunities to live our values? Here's a process to do that. My good man, straight ahead. How are you?
Excellent.
Okay. Let's see if we can take care of that. Actually, no, this is a good one. I'm going to give you a power, okay? Here's your power. You get to pick one value and one value only. Whatever value you choose, every single member of UNDP worldwide will do at least one thing every day that embodies that value. It will not be the only value they embody, but it's the only one that's guaranteed. If you had that kind of power, which value would you choose?
So it should be, I guess, sincereness.
Ooh, sincerity. Authenticity.
Sincerity, yeah.
Yeah, sincerity. Okay. Finish this sentence for me, would you? Sincerity is a commitment to what?
Commitment to yourself.
Commitment to yourself, commitment to being yourself, commitment
Yeah.
to figure out what you like, who you are, and actually living up to it. Cool. That's awesome. Let me ask a couple other folks. What would you choose? Empathy is a commitment to what?
To step into other people's shoes before you make a decision.
To step in. I like that. I was this group will probably get this too. I was doing an exercise with Engineers Without Borders with a bunch of African students, and phrases like "step into someone else's shoes." Like as a native English speaker, I don't realize like that can be odd. And he said, "So hold on, why would you do that?" He said, "It means to understand like what their experience is." He goes, "Then why wouldn't you put on all of their clothes?" I'm like, that is a genius question. It always changes it forever. So I want you to think about yours, and it's a gave this power, so I'm asking a lot of questions and I don't want to go long. I gave this power to my students. And I said, one value only. Whatever you pick, every member of this campus will do it one every day. And they surprised me because they picked impact. I said, okay, that can be good, that can be bad. So, impact is a commitment to what? And they said, it's a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. I said, amazing. Go do that. That's your assignment. In order to pass it, what you have to do is every day this week, you have to come to my office at the end of the day, and you have to tell me what you did that lived up to that value, that lived up to that definition. And it was a really cool exercise for 3 days. Because what would happen is they'd get to my office, they'd stand in the outer office, and they'd just do this. What they were doing is they were thinking back over their day to identify this moment. And they usually had one, but it was the first time they thought about their commitment all day. They were using this value to evaluate behavior that had already happened. Leaders use their values to drive behavior and to change decision-making in the moment. And so we needed a new approach. The cool thing about working at a university is that somewhere in the building is an expert on everything. PhDs know an awful lot about very little. We sat around once over beers once, and I said, everybody go around and pick one thing from their research that is weird but not interesting. That's a really hard thing to come up with. Just some useless fact that you discovered in your research. And the winner was, when ants get drunk, they always sort of veer to the left. We haven't fixed the climate crisis, but we've got the ants are drunk. So I went to some site prompts, and I said, okay, this is what we're looking for. We don't want to make a conscious commitment to a behavior change, but are there unconscious drivers that we could use as well to reinforce our conscious commitment? And they gave me 2. They said the first is do not put this in a speech if you're trying to talk it, the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik, it sounds crazy, right? Do you know what the Zeigarnik effect is? Things that you haven't finished take up a more prominent spot in your consciousness than things that you have. Stuff that you haven't finished bugs you. That's the Zeigarnik effect, all right? That's just life, it's reality. I didn't know there was a scientific term for it, okay? The second was the question behavior effect. Question behavior effect is this. If I ask you a series of questions about a particular behavior in the morning, you are way more likely to engage in that behavior later in the day. So if I, in the morning, you and I were having breakfast, and I said, what's the most generous thing anyone ever did to you? Do you think you're a generous person? What's the most generous thing that you ever did for another person? Later that day, if someone on the street asked you for money, you were like 5 times more likely to give it to them. And you won't even realize it. Why? So what we realized is this. If questions are a powerful driver of human behavior, and unfinished tasks cause psychic discomfort, one of the most powerful controllers of human behavior are unanswered questions. Unanswered questions completely drive human thought and behavior. So, let's create a question. A question that's carefully crafted so that to answer it you have to do something. And if you do the something, you live the value. And what we do is, this question, we stick it in our brains in the morning, and it technically will bother us until we answer it. And the question we created was, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? It's put on a pedestal, leadership. So if I went up to you and I said, by email, in person, anonymously in a note, the way you live your life, the way you treat other people, the way you do your job, inspires me, it's made me a better person, and you are a leader in my life, and I just want to tell you that. It's really unlikely you're going to walk away from that interaction not feeling better off. So, go out and do this. It's not a nebulous thing. Oh, go try to find a moment of impact. No, this is a very specific thing. Answer this question. What we wanted to see is if our mission was to journal an answer to this every day, would we be more likely to seize on opportunities consciously than we were before? 7 days, 12 students, 1 instructor committed to doing this. Basically, it's why I quit my job. Because of what happened over the next 7 days. For me personally, and for my students. Because the impact of this shift in trying to control consciously what our behavior was and stay consistent was, I've never seen anything like it. My students leaned into this. They destroyed this. Their former coaches, their former teachers, their parents, their best friends, former bosses, the really nice hot dog guy on campus Because there's someone in this area, in the service industry, that makes your day on a regular basis. They serve you coffee, or they're at your favorite restaurant, and they know your name, and they congratulate you when good things happen in your life. This was our guy. This was Muhammad. And I went up on Thursday, and he looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" "I'm getting a hot dog." He said, "No. 3 students have told me I'm a leader this week." You're up to something, aren't you? My favorite. One of my students got on. He waited at the bus stop for his bus driver from kindergarten to grade 8, and he got on the bus after all the students got on. But the bus driver, because he's good at his job, and this kid's 22, he's like, "What are you doing?" And Aaron was the guy's name. He said, "Look, you don't remember me, but I rode your bus for 9 years, and I was really smart and really fat, and that's a bad combination in elementary school. And I was bullied so mercilessly that every day before I could go to school, I would have to stand in my front hallway and cry as hard as I could for 30 seconds. Then I could come outside. And I'd get on your bus, and I'd sit at the front, because all the cool kids sit at the back, and we'd drive to school, and you would sing Disney songs badly the entire way to school. And the kids in the back were merciless. They were awful. And again, you heard every word they said, and you didn't care. And my whole world was about what these kids thought and what these kids said, and you didn't care. I'd never seen that before. And watching you do it, some days it was the only thing that made me say, I could do this one more day, and one day I could be like him. And he said, I get to go to Harvard next year for grad school, and you were as big a part of that as any teacher I ever had. And I just wanted to make sure that somebody told you that. There were 12 students and 1 instructor, and we all did one of those every day. Like, I wrote a book just about a lot of the things that happened as a result of that. This question did not change who we were or what we valued. But this question did make us so much more aware of how many leaders surrounded us in our lives and our organizations that were being unrecognized. It made us so much more aware of how many opportunities for impact we were leaving on the table every day, and it made us far less likely to allow those opportunities to slip by when we did see them. Because when they popped up, we recognized them as an opportunity to answer this question. There wasn't a single person who didn't cry when we did this 7 days later and everyone sat down and started sharing their ideas. And we realized we were onto something. So we called the process operationalizing your leadership values. Because at the University of Toronto, if it doesn't sound pretentious, you're not trying hard enough. 3 steps. 1, pick something you want to stand for. Actually, no. Pick something you want to live up to. Because it's way easier to stand up for something than it is to live up to it, right? We see it, you just had an election, you see that all the time, all right? So, pick something you want to live up to. Define what it means clearly. It's a commitment to. Because a commitment to is followed by a verb, followed by behaviors. Then step 3, an action-oriented question that you embed into your daily expectations for yourself that cannot be answered without living the value. Action-oriented means it can't be a yes-no question. Did you recognize someone else's leadership today? Yes. But you don't have to prove it, right? How did you or what did you do has to be specific. Who, what, why, where, and how. That's a question. This was so effective that for 30 days, we journaled how we answered that question. And by the way, I was never a journaling believer. I was like, I'm not writing in a diary. It's a game changer. It's a game. Because here's the thing. On days where you suck, either perceived or real, opening it up and being reminded of all of what you have done is a powerful thing to have with you. Even if it's just in your phone, right? I don't have a little book. I have it in my phone. And it's password protected, right? That's a key thing, okay? But ultimately, for 30 days, then we added a second value, and then a third, and then a fourth. By the end of the year, what we had was 6 questions, all tied to key values. And what we thought of it as is we called it the leadership test. The fundamental premise on which my work rests is this. We all wake up every single day having done the exact same amount to earn the title of leader. Nothing. And all we need to do is evaluate our leadership simply based on what we did today. That's it. Which means that we all have an opportunity and obligation every day to renew our commitment to leadership. But we have to prove it. Imagine this. Imagine your boss stood right here at the end of every day. I know this isn't your office, but imagine this is your office. And every day your boss stood here and they gave you a test, and you had to pass it every day or you were fired, it would change your priorities every day. Your priorities would always focus around what's on the test. Imagine the person you loved sat across the table every day and gave you a test. If you didn't pass it, you were done. That's how we did it. We said every single day, at the end of the day, we have to prove we deserve another day on this planet. Trust me, the work you do, you do, but prove it. And you know how we proved it? We passed the leadership test. The leadership test was 6 questions, and if we got 3 out of 6, we deserved another day on the planet. So every single day, we had a way of evaluating whether we actually were the type of person who every day, and it was non-negotiable. These are the 6 questions. I'm not going to dive too far into them because I do not want to take too much of your time. But what do I say to recognize someone else's leadership? By the way, you can just text 72,000 and you'll get the slides. What did I do today to make it more likely somebody would learn something as growth? What did I try today that might not work but tried anyway? In a world that educated us out of courage because it taught us to avoid mistakes more than it taught us to embrace growth, that's a tough one. That question was a game changer. I've flown in private jets because of that question. I got to ride a Formula 2000 race car. I met the love of my life because of that question. What have I done today to help someone else move closer to a goal in a world that teaches us we're all competing from a very young age? Why would they grade us if it wasn't to rank us? Why rank anybody if it's not to give people the top something the people at the bottom don't get? What have I done today to help someone else move closer to a goal? This is what creates true empowerment. If you could outperform 90% of the people in any organization, you'll be rewarded, you'll get promoted. But if you become the type of person where everyone who works with you outperforms everyone who doesn't, then you're indispensable. That's what our goal should be, and that's what we should teach our kids. What did I elevate instead of escalate today? Because class is treating people in situations, a commitment to treating people in situations better than they deserve to be treated. And what did I do today to be good to myself? And this, I want to just point out to all of you in this room, when people work at a job that is about serving others, that is about helping others, especially others who you recognize are not as privileged as you are, we often will do is we destroy ourselves in the process. What this means is the commitment to recognizing that you cannot add value to anyone else's life until you've added enough value to your own. The jobs that you do here, just everyone I've talked to here believes so strongly in what you do that just remember, leadership is not martyrdom. All right, when you have nothing left, you have nothing left to give. Make sure watch the television show that's beneath your intellectual ability. All right, read the track. I still download Grey's Anatomy. I don't care. It's much more complicated. Eat the cheesecake. What have you done today to be good to yourself? That's 6 questions. 2 are designed to add value to other people specifically. 2 are designed to add value to you personally. 2 of them are designed to add value to both. If you get 3 out of 6 of those, 365 days a year, that's over 1,000 conscious pieces of evidence that you matter. You know why sometimes it's hard to answer? We don't give ourselves evidence. We hope it, but we don't actually say, look, what I want to have people recognize is this. You're not always in charge of what you have to do every day. You're always in charge of who you are. The problem is if we don't use that power, we forget about it. What this does is even on the days where everything outside of your power blows up in your face, you can still go home and say, I was the woman I wanted to be today. I was the man I wanted to be today. I still got some of my questions. There's so much uncertainty in our lives. What this does for me is it always gives me momentum even on the days where I don't know what the future holds. Because when we don't know what the future holds, we often hesitate to act in the present in case we make the wrong call and screw up the future. It's way more important to be decisive than certain in life. What this does is allows you to make decisions every day that are consistent with who you want to be, even if you have no idea what's happening tomorrow. I'm gonna skip that. I want to wrap up. So my company is called Day One Leadership because a lot of it came from my personal experience. Day one starting a company, day one being a vocal advocate for mental health awareness. That meant I had to be open about the fact I'm bipolar in a world that still equates mental illness with mental weakness. Day one of going from 300 pounds or 320 pounds to whatever I am today, day one of a life without alcohol. Ultimately, what I learned in recovery is that if you don't want to have a drink the rest of your life, you got to choose not to have a drink today. And then treat every day of the rest of your life as if it's your first day of recovery. Because day one, an inherent sense of commitment, humility, and forgiveness. What day ones are about are non-negotiable behaviors that have to happen every day for you to get what you want. And you know what? I don't not have a drink when I have time. It's non-negotiable. With a computer and a laptop, with a laptop and a phone, I can answer all 6 of those questions in less time than it takes me to empty my email inbox. But for most of my life, I prioritize that email inbox over being the man I wanted to be. Your values have to be non-negotiable every day. I can't have a drink every day. I also can't let a day go by where I can't give myself evidence that I'm the man I want to be. I can't sacrifice anything else in the name of I cannot sacrifice who I want to be in the name of anything else. Got to give myself evidence. I didn't used to think of leadership like that. I apologize. This is the last piece. Is that cool?
Oh, yeah.
You're like,
You're good.
It's 5. Let us go home. We're all here to change the goddamn world.
And that clock is fast.
I want to respect your time. I just went through that very, very quickly. The idea is there is no one day in your life, one day in your health, one day in your career, one day in your relationships that doesn't start with a day one. My argument is figure out what the non-negotiable leadership behaviors that you start, if you could start over and build yourself as the leader you want to be, the person you want to be, and then just make sure they're non-negotiable every day. Trying to be that person every day, like for the rest of your life, is exhausting. Trying not to drink for the rest of my life is exhausting. So I don't worry about the rest of my life. I just worry about today. That's where evidence comes from. I didn't used to think of leadership. Anyone see my TED Talk, by the way? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell it. Is that cool?
Yes,
There's a bunch of you
it
have it. Because this is the story that encapsulates and started to shift how I thought of leadership, but I want you to realize this in the work that you do. Because when it's important and it's hard, sometimes it's easier to focus on the fact that it's hard than it's important because it's tiring and it's disappointing. But ultimately, I think that sometimes we let a lot of the moments where we're leaders pass by and we don't even notice it. And someone really opened my eyes to that back when I thought leadership was this tiny little club that not everyone can or should get into. Because I was competing my whole life to get into this little club, because if you get in the club, you get more money and more respect and more prestige and more opportunity. Plus, everyone in the club looked like me when I looked at it. I'm like, oh, clearly it's made for me. And so that's how I treated it. Because why would I be working so hard if everybody can be a leader, right? Why try to get in the club? And then some girl messed the whole thing up for me when I was 22 years old. I was taught growing up that letters after your name make you smarter. So I spent a lot of time collecting them. And my last night at my first university, I was there for 7 years. I was there for so long, the university paid for a goodbye party. And my last night there, a girl came up to me and she said, I remember the first time I ever met you. I didn't think I'd ever seen her before. And when you're a drinker, you do not like when people open the conversation with, I remember the first time I ever met you. I'm really sorry. But she told me a story from 4 years earlier, and she said, my first day at university, I didn't want to be there. The night before, I just started to cry because I was so convinced I wasn't ready for this. And my parents said, look, we know you're scared, but we're twice as scared as you are. Here's the deal. We go tomorrow. Once we're on campus, if you feel like you can't do it, we will take you home, and we love you no matter what. But if you don't at least try tomorrow after working so hard, you'll regret it the rest of your life. Our job as your parents is to make sure that doesn't happen. She goes, I knew they were right, so I went and I got in line on the first day, and everybody's screaming. Matching t-shirts, coordinated cheers. People who plan welcome activities to anything are almost always extroverts. And they plan activities that extroverts love. Hey, let's be noisy, let's cheer, let's yell, let's meet strangers. Right? If you're an introvert, it's not your idea of a good time. And she said, I'm standing in line. I think this is another place where only extroverts are valued. I will not spend 4 more years of my life in a place where you have to yell to fit in. And she said, I quit standing in line on my first day. I just quit. And as soon as I did, there was an extraordinary feeling of peace. I knew I'd made the right call. And she said, I turned to my parents to say, take me home, like they said they would. And before I could say anything, you came out of the nearest building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen a human being wear in my life. This is toned, like the hat here is toned way down from what I used to do. And she said, you were carrying this sign that said Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, which is a charity I just got involved with. And you had a big bucket of lollipops. And what you were doing is you were walking along this lineup of first-year students and their parents who couldn't leave And you were using the opportunity to try to convince them to go and shine shoes on a Saturday morning while hungover for your charity. And she said, you're going along the line and you're just being a goof, and all of a sudden you get to me and you stop and you stare at me. It was creepy. But then you smile at the guy next to me and you reach into your bucket and you hold out this lollipop and you say, dude, you have to stand next to this incredibly beautiful woman for 2 more hours. You should talk to her. Give her the lollipop. A lollipop. Now, a couple of things I now realize 20 years later. 1, was not at all respectful of her personal space. And 2, ridiculously heteronormative. However, play this to the end. But I think we have to recognize this. She goes, I've never seen the dude before in my life, but he turns beet red, won't even look at me, he just does this. Because I feel so bad for him because everyone is staring at him. That I take the lollipop. And as soon as I do, your whole demeanor changes. And you look so disappointed. And you turn to my parents and you say, look at your daughter. Look at your little girl. It's her first day away from home. Her first day without mom and dad to take care of her. And already, she is taking candy from a stranger. Nice parenting. She goes, everybody loses it. 20 feet, every direction, everybody starts to howl. And I don't know why, but in that moment, something in my brain shifted. And I said, okay, don't quit today. Quit tomorrow. And then somebody the next day did something, and I put it off another day, and it just kept happening, and eventually, I just stopped thinking about it. And I never quit. And I graduated in a few weeks. And I haven't talked to you once in the 4 years since that happened. But I heard that you were leaving. And before that happened, I had to come and tell you, you have been an incredibly important person in my life. And I'm going to miss you. Good luck. And walks off. Don't drop a story like that on somebody and wander away, okay? I have no idea how to process it. And I think she realizes this because she turns around and she walks back up and says, there's one more thing you should probably know. I've been dating that dude for 4 years. A year and a half after I moved 1,000 miles away, the two of them invited me to their wedding. She married the dude. Here's the thing. I don't remember that. Like, I searched my memory banks for that moment because I was awesome in that moment. I would like to remember being that funny once in my life. But that drives so much of the work that I do. That maybe the biggest moment of impact I've ever had, maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life, maybe the biggest impact I ever had on another human being, a moment that a girl walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you have been an incredibly important part of my life, is a moment that I don't even remember. We have been taught from a very young age to try to achieve things and acquire things so that people look at us as if we are leaders. So that we feel we have the right to raise our hands and call ourselves leaders, that I think we've lost sight of an essential fact. The primary determinant of how other people view us, and more importantly, how we evaluate ourselves, is how we behave on a day-to-day basis. That stares us in the face every day. And what you do every day, and whether you actually are giving yourself evidence that you are the woman or the man that you claim to be, that is what determines whether or not you feel like a leader. And any discussion of building leadership has to start with closing the gap between the person you want to be and how you are actually behaving. That's where leadership is born. How many of you in this room have a lollipop moment? Where someone walked up to you and told you that you've been important in their life in a way you didn't understand? How many of you have one of those moments, by show of hands? Okay. How many of you have told that person how much that meant to you when they did it? About a third. See, this is what I don't get. We live in a world where we celebrate birthdays, where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And you get a cake and a party. But we let people walk around who have made our organizations, our careers, and our lives better, and we don't tell them that. If you get nothing else from me today, tell the people who have made this organization, that has made your career, that has made your life better, tell them that, because leadership recognized is leadership created. And there's so much leadership around us, and the only reason that nobody sees it as leadership is no one told them that's how you see it. And every one of you, oh my God, in the work that you do, in the experience you've given me since I met you, every one of you creates lollipop moments every day. And if you think you don't, think of the hands that didn't go back up. You are one of the many people who have not been told for some reason. But remember, it's scary to think we can matter that much. Like, it's almost frightening to believe we can have that kind of impact on other people when we're not paying attention. Because as long as we keep leadership bigger than us, and as long as we keep leadership beyond us, and as long as we keep it about changing the world, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves permission to not expect it from ourselves and from each other every day. I think it's time to redefine leadership, all right? Because we've been told it's about changing the world, and here's the thing. There is no world. There's just 7 billion understandings of it. And that means every time you change one person's understanding of the world, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how many people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, and let's face it, sometimes, most importantly, every time you change one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in their own life, every time you change one person's understanding of the world, you change the whole world. And that's not beneath any of us, and it's not beyond any of us. You have dedicated your work, your life, and everything you do to changing one person's understanding of the world at a time, and yet nobody's hands went up. If you get nothing, I've already said that today, all right? But take this from me, okay? When next time somebody asks you, are you a leader? Remember that probably the biggest moment of leadership in your life, you'd have no idea that it happened. But if you ultimately say, this is who I want to be, and here's the proof I give myself every day, and here's the process I'll use to do it, you can't deny your leadership, as much as you're going to want to try. If we understand leadership like that, if we teach leadership like that, if we embrace leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And it's a simple idea, but that doesn't mean that it's a small one. And I want to thank you so much for the honor of coming and talking to the people who do this kind of work. I'm so honored to have had the chance to be here today. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for listening to so much of what I have to say.
Thank you, Drew, for joining us. We've been so fortunate to have you here. I listened to your TED Talks years ago, and it made a huge impact on me as a leader. And it's a philosophy, and it's a way of thinking about leadership that I've shared with my team and everyone that I've led, because it's had a profound impact on who I am. And I actually was talking to one of my colleagues that today is one of the most exciting days I've had at UNDP, because I've admired your work, your research, and the impact that you've made. So we are so fortunate that with the crazy schedule that you have and the flight delays, that you managed to spend a remarkable, unforgettable hour with us. And
It was unforgettable for me.
And the fact that, one of the things we've tried really hard to sort of focus on here at UNDP is that there is a leadership title, but that every single one of us can display the leadership values. And we've been trying really hard to get that message across, both in how we message leadership, but as well as bringing in people like yourself who are experts and thought leaders who add value to that discourse that we're trying to create. So thank you on behalf of all of us. And we really want to stay in touch with you and find ways to connect.
And don't thank me for making time to come. Like,
No,
I literally, when my assistant was like, yeah, the UN called.
Actually, no, you should also say the UN called and asked you to do this pro bono. And there's a big
Wasn't this like I jumped out? I was just like, yeah. And he's like, do you want to pretend that you don't want to do it? I'm like, no, not at all. Thank you. Like, this has been it's been so exciting to just be a part of. I love how everybody we walk through, like, all these people changing the world right now. Like, they literally say that crap. And it was really cool. I was like, oh my God, this really is the case. So thank you. I went longer, and I know that your time is very valuable, so thank you for that.
No one moves.
If you want the slides, 72,000, I will say this, because my business manager freaking insists on it. If you want to know what your own values are, just asking actually generally doesn't work. If you want to know how to surface your own, if you would like to know how to create your own leadership test that's customized to you, in August I released my first book, and it's a walkthrough guide on how to do that. If you text that number, at some point in the near future, you will probably get information on how to get it for Christmas. But it showed up on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list and kind of blew my mind. So apparently it's not bad. But yeah, it's filled with how to do it yourself. And after 15 years, I only usually have an hour to talk, and so now there's 9 hours of stuff in the book. So thank you. Like, I mean that. I can't say enough.
Thank you.